Mm. Oh, somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long. Oh, somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long. Yes, it's gone on far too long. I tell you, it's gone on far too long. Oh, somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore. Oh, somebody's poisoning the water, and it's gone on far too long. Yes, it's gone on far too long. I tell you, it's gone on far too long. Oh, somebody's poisoning the water, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos, and I'm a sociologist who taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York City. As philosopher Cornel West puts it, America's social experiment in democracy is fast approaching its moment of reckoning. The outcome is very much in doubt. In the face of a catastrophic pandemic and the chaos of sustained protest and rioting, Trump's authoritarian reflex is to further divide and try to consolidate power through military action and threats of vicious dogs and ominous weapons. Protesters are expected to be put in jail for long periods of time by state political leaders who would look like jerks if they don't follow his advice. He warns them that if they don't dominate, they're wasting their time. They're going to run over you. Trump is offering us a vivid insight into his own mind and fears. Neoliberal corporate Democratic opposition in the form of Joe Biden, the Clintons, and Obama, although certainly better than the Trump alternative, offer milquetoast, feeble voices of reform. They lack a coherent vision and the moral authority to bring about an end to America's racism, poverty, militarism, and empire, distorted moral values, and ecological devastation. As Reverend Barber of the Poor People's Campaign would put it, who will stand in the breach? Other voices aren't trying to achieve the blessed community, but realize that America can't achieve it unless the central moral dilemma of racism remains unresolved. We can't keep saying one thing about our national and religious ideals and live another. The only solution is for a spiritual transformation and healing of white America's soul. An end to what psychiatrist Jim Gilligan calls the cycle of violence, rooted in humiliation, despair, disrespect, shame, and domination of the other. Today in the Radical Imagination, we'll be taking on two long-standing spiritual warriors for justice and radical love. They see this age of catastrophe and chaos as a chance to finally bring about tikkun olam, a healing of the world, a time to bring about the beloved community, or as Martin Luther King put it, the World House Gathering. In his book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, King described the concept in this way. A widely separated family inherits a house in which they have to live together, black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Gentile and Jew, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Hindu. A family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interest, who, because we can never again live apart, must learn somehow to live with each other in peace. Susannah Heschel is an American scholar and activist and the Eli M. Black Distinguished Professor of Jewish Studies and chair of the Jewish Studies program at Dartmouth College. She's the daughter of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was a close friend and confidant of Martin Luther King, marching alongside him in the Selma Freedom March of 1965. Reverend James Forbes is a visiting professor of humanities at Duke Divinity School. A longtime civil rights activist, he's a senior minister at Riverside Church in New York City, where he served the multicultural congregation for 18 years as its first African minister. So I'm so pleased and so blessed to have you here at this time of catastrophe and chaos, but yet possibilities of that blessed community, Tikkun Olam, finally being achieved. So welcome, both of you, to the Radical Imagination. I'm so grateful and happy you're both here.
Good to be with you myself today, and especially with my friend, Professor Susannah Heschel.
Absolutely. We've been trying to do this for a while to get you two together, and I'm so glad that you're here. So to start with, I thought I have in my hand here your syllabus, Reverend Forbes. Duke Divinity School, the World House Gathering, which you taught this past semester, correct? And can you start us off by telling us what you were trying to accomplish? What do you mean? What did you try to get across to the students about King's concept, and how did you do it? How was it? Was it very successful? And what did the students think about it?
Well, let me tell you, I started it because I made a commitment to Dr. King on the day of his assassination, when I finally crossed the Marshall Street Bridge, turned into the parking lot of Medical College of Virginia. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel and I said, "Martin, you shall not have died in vain." So when I started to do some teaching at Duke, I thought one of the first things I want to do is to keep my promise to Martin, to lift up one of the ideas in one of his last books. You know, where do we go from here? The idea about the World House. When he said the World House suggests that we can never again successfully inherit the blessings of this good earth unless we agree to live on the earth together. So I thought, why don't I do something unusual as a teacher? I decided I wanted to pull together students in the undergraduate and the Divinity School and representatives from Black, white, Asian, and Latinx congregations in the Durham community, bring them together for the 13 weeks of the semester and say, our objective is to see if we can model the World House. Can we talk about, first of all, what was Dr. King's idea of what the beloved community living in that World House would look like? And then we're going to discover what is it that suggests to us that in order to be the beloved community, we're going to have to learn to do it together across the divides of race, class, ideology, and faith traditions. And then to have the students discuss, what is it that you believe that your church, your mosque, your synagogue might do to help build that new arrangement called the beloved community? And then what do you personally feel is your responsibility to help bring the World House into reality. So that was what it was all about. And we were going to listen to Dr. King's speeches, the speech that he gave at the Lincoln Memorial, the speech that he gave at the Riverside Church, A Time to Break Silence, the speech that was written about the experience at the Birmingham jail, the sermon that he preached at the Washington Cathedral, the speech that he gave or sermon he gave at Ebenezer Baptist Church. We will listen to what he was saying with an eye to what would the World House look like together. In each of the class sessions, after we had lecturers come in as resource people, we would break up into small groups and ask, how can we have dialogue across the divides that we represent and model in our attitude of respect for one another, our listening to one another, our inquiry regarding what we might need to do together? That was a part of it. We started each class with Lift Every Voice and Sing, because in a sense, we would hope that one day that might be a World House anthem that we attach to our Star Spangled Banner, and then put Lift Every Voice and Sing as a kind of community hymn. We closed each class with the song, I Need You to Survive. I won't harm you with words from my mouth. I need you to survive. So anyway, we went through that and had a wonderful time. We had Reverend Barber come in, Eddie Glaude to come in. We had my friend from Shannon Daly Harris from Princeton to come by to talk to the group, and Melanie Harris, a womanist scholar who is an expert in terms of the ecology. Each of these lecturers talked about their understanding of King's vision. And beyond that, we would make sure that we as a community would wrestle with what was going on. So when the virus came, some people in our community were struck by it. So the group would pause and pray, what can we do to help these families out? It turned out to be a marvelous course. The students in their evaluation indicate that it will probably impact their ministries in the years to come in ways perhaps that many other courses did not. So anyway, that's just a kind of overview of what that was all about.
That sounds wonderful, unbelievable. But so let's say you had a 14th week and Professor Susannah Heschel was going to give a lecture. Susannah, how would you want to join the group from your own?
Well, might I say, Susannah was scheduled to come, but her schedules robbed her of the opportunity to come down for that.
Fair enough. Well, next semester then. Okay. Great. So go ahead, Susannah.
I just want to say that Reverend Forbes has been for many years pastor of the Riverside Church in New York City. And that's where I've gotten to know him. And you know, that church is not just the church of the Upper West Side, it's the church of all New York and of a huge community of people. And what I think is so important is that Reverend Forbes over and over again allowed us to come in and to scream our pain. And at the same time, he gave us his heart to heal us and to guide us so that we left feeling optimistic again and hopeful. And it's a very difficult thing in a moment like this today in the United States to have a sense of hope. And I would say that for me as a Jew, it's even harder. Why? Because I have the feeling right now that although I have some wonderful friends and colleagues, there are some great Jewish organizations, especially of young people, not only, that are out there in the streets and doing wonderful work. But at the same time, I want to say, I worry that we as a Jewish community, as Jewish thinkers, as Jewish intellectuals, we have rendered ourselves irrelevant. And that pains me deeply And we've rendered ourselves irrelevant because of decisions we've taken over the last few decades. So I was actually in Riverside Church when Dr. King spoke out against the war in Vietnam. And my father was there as one of the people on the podium. And of course, at that moment, he would be there because he was one of the founders of the Clergy and Laymen Concerned About Vietnam. But what about today? What have we done? So I'm very concerned about the future of the Jews in this country and of the, should I say, the Jewish conscience.
Yeah, we've had this conversation before, Susannah, and I agree with you very, very much. You talk about your father. This might be an appropriate time to just read the very brief telegram that he sent to President John F. Kennedy in 1963. And here it is. I look forward to the privilege of being present at our meeting tomorrow. The likelihood exists that the Negro problem will be like the weather. Everybody talks about it, but nobody does anything about it. Please demand of religious leaders personal involvement, not just solemn declaration. We forfeit the right to worship God as long as we continue to humiliate Negroes. The churches and synagogues have failed. They must repent. Ask of the religious leaders to call for national repentance and personal sacrifice. Let the religious leaders donate 1 month's salary toward a fund for Negro housing and education. I propose that you, Mr. President, declare a state of moral emergency. I mean, the contrast is so obvious. We have a president declaring war on us. And a couple more sentences. A Marshall Plan for aid to Negroes is becoming a necessity. The hour calls for moral grandeur and spiritual audacity. That was your father.
Yes, it was.
Sent people telegrams back then, yeah.
That was in 1963.
1963.
President Kennedy did not want the March on Washington in August to take place.
That's true.
He wanted to subvert it by bringing in a group of civil rights leaders to the White House. Yeah, state of moral emergency then. It breaks my heart to think if my father were alive today, he would keel over. What's going on? But it's very clear that the lines are drawn. It's one side or the other. And my question to the Jews is, which side are you on right now? And that's it. And you make that decision right now, there's no choice. That's it. And yes, I would say that in fact, what my father writes in a telegram, that we forfeit the right to worship God if we're not out on the streets protesting what's going on, if we're not devoting our lives to changing this country, which is sick with racism and needs to be taken apart and rebuilt thoroughly. Someone just wrote an article saying, would today's Supreme Court even approve the Brown versus the Board of Education? Would they have voted the other way in favor of maintaining segregation? Yeah, I worry about that.
And the professional classes have failed us among the economic classes and the political class. So you're talking, I mean, Jews have succeeded to a considerable extent in those professional worlds, in academia, right? In business, in law, and so on. So where are these voices? And to back up what King and Reverend Forbes have tried to do.
Let me tell you something, Jim.
Yeah.
When I hear Jews talk about how well Jews have done in this country, I don't like to hear that. You know why? Because it just feels to me that every time Jews affirm how great we are and how great we've done, that's not about Jews. That's a racist statement. I don't like hearing that. I'm tired of it. You know perfectly well the Jews were benefited very well by all kinds of federal programs, especially after World War II, but not only. It set up suburbs and low rates of interest for buying a home and so on. So yes, Jews could move to the suburbs, and then they think, well, we pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps. No, we didn't, because if you had black skin, you couldn't go in to live in those suburbs. What could you do? So every time Jews talk about how great we are, they're making an implied racist statement, and it bothers me very much. So Jews benefited enormously from having white skin, and no Jew should ever say, look, I'm a victim. On the contrary, look what they've benefited from. And from that, having been so benefited from these programs for white people, they should be all the more conscious and aware of who was excluded and who was deprived of all of these benefits the Jews had. Shouldn't you, when you go to a high place of success, look around and see, look at the people who haven't been given these privileges? How outrageous is that? You want to talk about tikkun olam? It begins right there. Stop praising yourself. Look around and see who got you up there, what benefited you, and who's being excluded from that. That's tikkun olam. That's the beginning, little first baby step.
Right. I hope that my comment was, in fact, was backing up what you're saying.
It does. Yeah. And let me say that there's a fine book about this by Karen Brodkin, How the Jews Became White Folks, that lays out very clearly all the ways in which Jews benefited from the laws of this society. And let's keep in mind, when we see that, and Jews have to realize what institutional and structural racism is, because we managed to get out of it. We managed to exclude ourselves for the most part, because of course there are many Jews of color. Let's remember that. And Jews of color have been suffering and been telling us for a long time what they've been suffering in the United States and even within the Jewish community because of the racism within and the idea that a Jew is racist to another Jew. I mean, where do you begin with that?
Yeah.
What kind of a sickness that you're in a community where people hate each other? That's not a community. You want to talk beloved community? There's the first step.
Reverend Forbes.
All right, what are we seeing? What did we do as Jews? The one great thing we did, we have a Bible. And look what happened yesterday with this monster from the White House taking a Bible like that. It's disgusting. They're trying to steal our Bible? No. The line is drawn.
I think a reporter asked him, is that his Bible? And he didn't know what to say. He said, well, it's a Bible. But yeah, so.
No, his daughter handed it to him from her pocketbook, it says in the newspaper.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, sure.
Holding it up like that, the sword in the book, huh? And then all the people who are hurt and harmed, where's the courage now in this country? The courage is in the streets. The courage is in the streets. And aren't we going to open our hearts and be inspired by these brave people who are protesting? What are we going to do? All of us sitting in our homes, me teaching a class, huh? Where's my courage?
Reverend Forbes.
Well, when the president held up the Bible, I was reminded that Bible I was asked to read at the beginning of the celebration or the commemoration of the arrival of 20-odd Negroes off the coast of Hampton, Virginia, 400 years ago. But as I was writing an article about the sesquicentennial, I was urged to open the Bible, which is what I would also urge the president to do. I opened the Bible, and in Genesis, the first book of the Bible, there was this account that Abraham was told, "Know of a certainty, your people will be sojourners in a land that is not their own, and they will be slaves there. And after 400 years, I will judge the country whom they have served, and then I will bring them out with great possessions." It's a fascinating thing that as a preacher myself, I had not paid attention to that 400-year reference. But the good news was that the God Almighty was going to bring them out, but first judge the country that they had served. So what I want to say is, Mr. President, if you read that book, you will discover that there may be some good news. The good news may be that this is a 400-year period? Could it be that the great spirit of the universe, the creator, has determined that enough is enough, and that God may indeed be helping people to see? Those of you who, under the ideology of white supremacy, have you not oppressed long enough? Have you not played the game of destroying families, cultures, people of color, making them vulnerable? Maybe the Great Spirit is saying, now is the time to turn things around. Time to repent, time to repair, time to revision, and time to restructure. In fact, people ask me, where's your hope? My hope today is, and you must pardon my constant reference, I hope the God of the universe is not going to allow the current outrage to be unheeded, but that this will be the occasion when people of the United States will be required to stop and think about what aspects of our past do you want to make your disclaimer about? What parts of the old normal do you now view as abnormal? Now that we have become a culture of despiritualization, and a culture through its ideology has engaged in cannibalization, eating up the flesh of God's children, which aspects are you prepared to turn aside? And in this virus we are going through, you talk about wanting to get the economy back, wanting to discover the new normal. I want to know from most Americans, what aspects of the old abnormal are you willing to put behind you? And what do you view as the new normal of justice, equality, compassion, mercy, mutuality of respect? Are you prepared to invest to bring into being? I think the Great Spirit is canvassing the land. Are you willing to put the old abnormal away? Are you willing to embrace a new normal of democratic idealism, of global sensitivity, of what Dr. King talked about, the inescapable network of mutuality? That's what I'm thinking about these days.
The young people seem to be getting it. And in these protests, you see over and over again, it's very diverse and they're very determined. I mean, the idea of going out there in the streets in the middle of a pandemic and fighting for the justice that needs to happen is a monumental undertaking. So the courage seems to be there, the integrity among the great majority are there. So the hope is in the young people, it seems, this diverse group that's out there fighting. And we're still not sure, again, about those professional classes, the economic and political elites. How do we impact on them in the same way?
I wonder who you were hoping to answer that question. First of all,
I left it open. Yeah,
let me say, if the Great Spirit is bringing the moment of deliverance closer, I am not prepared to dismiss anybody from the prospect of participating. So I'm hoping that the young people will use their energy to protest, but very soon I hope they will begin to do more strategic planning. Don't just protest without also planning. What changes do we have to bring about so that America can look like the place where God's children live, all of them being God's children. Strategic planning of the social, economic, and political processes in this nation. Strategic planning of how we repair the damage. Strategic planning regarding resources for repairing. Strategic planning for liberating the oppressed from their inordinate levels of incarceration, from community schools that have been differentially funded so that the inequality in education is now rampant across the land. Now, I am not prepared to give a pass to the old people, to the economic elite. When the Great Spirit goes to work, the Lord needs their resources, their economic genius that they use to pile up resources for themselves. God needs that genius to begin to build a more equitable society. So let's say, don't give the old folks a pass. Let's talk about intergenerational cooperation and respect. We're going to need everybody. And listen, I'm a Democrat, but don't even give Republicans a pass. Now that's a reach right there, given the behavior we have observed during the current administration. But God needs some decent Republicans with some decent Democrats, some decent independents that are willing to say it is no longer viable to have greed and selfishness give the principles that build our society. We are going to need all of the above to come together to say the only wise pattern towards survivability is to recover some sense of the common good, to recover some of the sense of our mutuality, to discover a global understanding, and to have cosmic responsibility for making this world a place where we can all live in unity and peace and understanding.
Totally agreed.
Those are great words.
It,
Those are great words, Reverend Forbes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
very wise advice.
I wonder if you're all worried also of counter movements. I mean, with every movement, there's counter movements, and we're in the middle of a counter reaction to some of the efforts that you're talking about there. Are you worried about this taking on a increasingly violent militaristic response?
I'm worried because, and I tend not to be conspiratorial in my orientation and thinking, but I almost believe that there are strong forces that are just itching for the outbreak of violent riots across this land. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. When I used to be in civil rights marches, I remember the time some of us were marching and various other groups would attach themselves to our march and discredit it by some of the behavior that they helped to incite. I'm fearful that now there is not only the discrediting of protesters, I suspect some people would love to see such outbreak of violence and unrest that maybe there would even seem to be a justification for calling into play martial law. I think, having observed the various methods of voter suppression, that now some people are excited that the virus introduces a very sophisticated means of voter suppression. Kill off the vulnerable. Ain't that interesting? How that's a form of, and for the activities that are proposed, the encouragement to disregard social distancing. I wonder if some people are saying that's the best way to ensure that we're going to have a victory. Or if things get so bad, martial law called into effect, maybe it'll get to be, we can't even afford to have an election this year. I fear that the forces of destabilization, the dismantling of democracy, are as vigorous in their effort as those who are protesting for a more just society. And I'm crossing my fingers and my toes that the Spirit will activate people of goodwill so that we will advance the cause towards the kind of reflection that leads to national plebiscite saying, away with the evils of the past. Let's embrace the survival possibilities of a new normal in the days ahead.
I know we've talked, Suzanne, too. You've been worried about also the sabotaging of the election. So are you of similar mind here, that there's this incredible danger of that happening?
Of course. This is actually, I'm sure, being plotted in the White House right now, how to achieve that. We have a Republican donor who's now running the post office and running it into bankruptcy with the idea that if we have mail-in ballots, he'll say, well, we lost them, or whatever. He'll burn them as they do in the Plot Against America novel. But it seems to me that we actually do have several things going on at once. There is, I think, a civil war within the Republican Party. There's those who are, of course, falling all head over heels in love with Trump. And then there are those who really are very concerned and upset about him. And that is going on in that party. And we're watching that unfold. At the same time, I think what we're seeing in the streets today signifies that there is no going back, that something very important has changed in this country, period. And yes, he can bring out guns and he can kill us, Trump, but it's not going to change that. This will remain. This what's happened in the past 10 days, this is a momentous occasion. And that cannot be suppressed. This is a revolution of the spirit, of culture, of politics, among many other things. And no matter how many bodies he wants to try to kill and maim, we will prevail ultimately, and he will go away ultimately. So I believe that very strongly. But yes, I agree, there's a threat of dictatorship that's looming over us and looming over the rest of the world. And this is insane. Who wants to be living under a dictatorship? Nobody does. And those who do are desperate to get out of it. So why anybody would think that Trump is a good idea is beyond me. And that includes this so-called professional class. They are going to be crushed in a dictatorship just like everyone else. They think that because Trump is looting the treasury and giving the rich people a little more money, and God knows what they do with it, honestly. They think that they're going to be safe from a dictatorship. They're going to enjoy this. No, they won't. They will suffer too. And they better realize that quickly. And there's no amount of money worth living in a dictatorship, giving up your freedom to live like that. Let them think also about their children and their grandchildren and the future of their family. We don't live just for this moment. And you don't live just for your present day bank account or the stock market. Think about the future. What's going to be with this kind of a situation? So, yeah, I agree with Reverend Forbes. Strategic planning is very important.
What are some of the structures, the organizations that we can work with that will take these values and energy and put them forward?
Well,
we have many organizations.
You go right ahead, Susannah.
No, we have many organizations. You're about to say the courts, the justice system. I mean, the fear is that all the institutions that we have in this country are being corrupted. Look what William Barr is doing with the Justice Department. Look what they're doing with the courts of law. What are they saying? We want to get in judges, the Senate, Mitch McConnell says, we want to get in judges on our side. Justice is supposed to be blind, not winking at the Republicans. Look what we're doing for you. What happened to blind justice? I don't know. Did their brains fall out? What's going on here? And let them know that they may think they're going to win for the next 5 minutes. But you know what? Then the tables will turn and they're going to see. This cannot prevail, because the bottom line is that evil is never, never the end of history.
It's also a battle of legitimacy. What moral legitimacy does the system have anymore? And what are the new venues of moral legitimacy that can grow out of that destruction?
Well, in my understanding, churches, mosques, synagogues, ashrams, faith communities, I suspect, have to ask again, to what extent do our practices today, our religious practices, impact the shape of society? It's almost as if closing down our religious institutions where we gather has as an effect, maybe you close those down so we can get out into the public square, and begin to remind us of the foundations of our democratic society. I'd like to see an interfaith great awakening where all of the religious groups, with their many differences, will begin to ask, how do we together help to build a world that honors the Creator, respects the creation itself, the various orders of creation? We have to ask, what is the energy that was deposited in our particular religious tradition that God can use now that we're so desperately in need of global regeneration? So isn't it interesting to talk about the revival of the religious institutions in their capacity to witness to a world that has as its creator one God, and to recognize that we are one people as human beings? Our species needs to ask, how can we act like human beings together to respect each other despite the polarizing impact that has divided us one from the other?
Suzanne, do you see some of that occurring also within the Jewish organizational structure? Talked about it before. You're not really sure that that's happening, but is there hope?
Is there hope? Perhaps the purpose of this virus is also to expose for us what has really been developing in this country over many years and decades. We see something with clear eyes suddenly that we should have been seeing all along. But what do we see? I see a few privileged people who are working from home and enjoying their life on Zoom and appreciating all of the things that are available to them on Zoom. And then I see masses of people, mostly Black and brown, working and putting their lives in danger in hospitals, in grocery stores, in the streets, in bus drivers, and so on, exposing their lives to a terrible and potentially lethal virus. Now, what do I see? I see America becoming one big slave plantation. And that has to stop. This situation that's been developing for a long time, we have to stop for a minute and say, wait a minute, where are we now? Where are we? As God asked Adam and Eve, where are you? Where are you? Where are we morally? Where is our integrity? Are you saying we don't care about our integrity? What kind of a human being are you then? So I just would want to say, I hope very much that the fearful virus, and it is fearful, and I understand that fear, of course, but fear can be an excuse to avoid moral courage and taking action in this terrible time and realizing again, the lines are drawn. What side are you going to be on? How will you be judged in the future? Ask yourself that, I want to say to everyone, including my fellow Jews.
Reverend Forbes, you are also discussing and debating this within your own different Christian denominations, correct? I mean, the Christian right, are they in some way receptive to your message? How do they distort it? Or do they?
I am not sure that the Christian right hears my message. Maybe I had better be a little bit more efficient and effective in reaching out. But there is a story that I hope I get a chance to share with them. One Sunday morning, after Dr. King had preached a sermon at Ebenezer Baptist Church, he gave the benediction, and then he sat down with his hand holding his head, and for a while sat there motionless. The next Sunday, he explained to the members of his congregation what had happened. He said he got to thinking about a song they loved to sing. It was, "Jesus, I love you for your tender care. Jesus, I love you, I'll own you anywhere. Jesus, I love you, you always bring me through. Jesus, I love you. Yes, oh yes, I do." And he said he wanted to say to the congregation, you can't talk about your relationship with Jesus as if it's a romantic relationship. Says it has to do with the values that he stood for. You can't sing that song, he said to them, and fight against everything he stood for. How can you say you love Jesus as Christians and then don't provide for educational opportunity for all God's children? How can you say you love Jesus with all of the wonderful fervor that you used to sing that song with and not make sure there's health care for everybody? How can you say you love Jesus and there's not housing, decent jobs, adequate wages, respect for people beyond consideration of the configuration of their sexual expression and sexual being? Dr. King was saying, and I would like to say to evangelicals, y'all, don't even claim to love Jesus if you continue to fight against the very existence and the well-being of God's children, not only Christians, but God's children of multiple racial and ethnic and ideological stripes.
It would be wonderful for them to hear that message. I wonder if there's a possibility of, I don't know, getting a couple of these ministers in your class next semester. Would they be willing to do that and begin some sort of dialogue with you?
Yes, it's going to be increasingly important for all of us who are progressive with respect to respecting the universe and respecting the people of the globe. It's going to become important for us not to spend as much time in our own silos. I think we have to lovingly reach out, vigorously protest against dehumanizing patterns wherever they occur amongst our own people or either amongst those who are our neighbors. So yes, it's no longer enough just to keep on saying the same old thing to the same group of people. We talk about global consciousness, if you have moral and spiritual sensibilities, we need to join like with the Poor People's Campaign and reach out all across the nation, as Reverend Barber is trying to do. The Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference is trying to do it. Black Lives Matters organizations trying to do it. All of us will have to report to the God of the universe, and the God of the universe will want to know what occasioned your silence.
I just have to maybe end on this one. To both of you, I tried my best several years ago, teaching 10 years at Yeshiva University, trying to open up in my classes the sort of message that you both have been talking about. And I used Cornel West and Michael Lerner's book, Blacks and Jews, Let the Healing Begin. It was the students loved it. But let me just say, I had high evaluations there, but I was fired by the president, who went over the chair and so on and so on. Just, I became whatever. But yet the happy part of it was students mobilized and complained and protested and told me that they were so grateful that I did open up their lives in a way that would have never happened. So I think that's part of the lesson. The struggle goes on. And I thank you both so very, very much for being here. We're going to close with a beautiful, beautiful song by Shlomo Carlebach. Brothers and my friends and brothers, be in peace. So thank you so much, Reverend Forbes. Thank you so much, Susannah. We will meet again very soon, and we'll carry on the struggle. Thank you so much again, very, very much. Bless you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination.
Okay. Leman achai v're'ai, leman achai v're'ai, adabrana, adabrana, shalom bach, leman achai v're'ai, leman achai v're'ai, adabrana, adabrana, shalom bach, leman ben Hashem Elokeinu avak shatov lach, leman ben Hashem Elokeinu avak shatov lach, la 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 la, oh la 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 do, no la 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 la, oh la 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 la, oh la 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 do. Because of my brothers and friends, because of my brothers and friends, please let me ask, please let me sing peace to you. Because of my brothers and friends, because of my brothers and friends, please let me ask, please let me sing peace to you. This is the house of the Lord. I wish the best for you. This is the house of the Lord. I wish the best for you. La 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 la.